whatever name that we go to, and I think it's probably makes sense to look at a new name, as long as we make sure that it's communicated well and it is, people understand a little bit of that, and there is some sort of, uh, yeah, I think that as long as people understand that connection, I think it's okay.
This is another episode of a special series called Enough for All of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. This series sheds light on 75 years of an NGO called CWS. My name is Maurice Bloem and I welcome you to another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is yet another episode of the podcast about Church World Service. And I'm really delighted because although he's never worked for Church World Service, basically he was one of Church World Service always. And that's Roland, and he will introduce himself as we always do. Roland.
Sure. Thank you, Maurice. So I'm Roland Fernandes, and currently my role is General Secretary of the General Board of Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church, which effectively means I'm the CEO of the organization responsible for the global work of the United Methodist Church. I've been involved, as Maurice said, with Church for Service for a very long time. Probably goes back, I think, somewhere in the late 90s. Because of my work through UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, which is one of the close partners and actually one of the community members as part of the United Methodist Church with Church World Service. And so I've been involved as a partner through funding arrangements. I've been on the board, just got off the board after I think 12 or 13 years. I've been the treasurer for most of that period of time, and also have just been a colleague and friend with many of the people who work, the great people who work at Church World Service. So it's been a great journey, and so I'm delighted to be able to talk to you, Maurice, about reflections on Church World Service.
Yeah, no, it's and you're one of those board members that were also part of a transition where Church World Service went from a representative board to a skills-based board. So that was, yeah, I mean, a lot of work needed to be done there as well. And no, I think Church World Services you should be very grateful for everything that you have done over the years. Do you still remember the first time that you heard about Church World Service?
Yeah, so if the question is what I heard about Church World Service, yeah, probably it was, I don't remember the first time specifically, but I was, fairly new to the job, and I was very confused between Church World Service and National Council of Churches. Of course, at that time they were one, and so it took me some time to, figure out what was Church World Service and what was National Council of Churches, and but that was probably, it was again very early in my work, maybe '97 around that time, because I was responsible for, as controller for United Methodist Committee on Relief, which used to, provide a certain amount of funding every year to the Church World Service component. And so that's when I first heard the name. But I think I really began to get more involved, I think when I started serving on the board, which was, I think, in the mid 2000s. I really began to really get a much better understanding of Church World Service and what it did.
And can you tell us, what do you like about the work of Church World Service?
Well, that's not an easy question. So let me say this. When I first started getting involved at the board level, and I began to get more involved as a member of the auditor, the A&F committee, Administration and Finance Committee, and I was the member first. I was just impressed by the way everything seemed to be organized. I came from an organization which was larger, but there was a lot of complexity and things were not as clear to me, at least at that point in time. but seeing, the work that Church World Service was doing, the finances was fairly simple, but it was in terms how it was presented. But some of the presentations, even the whole pieces around fund development and things like that, which I was relatively new to at the time, I was just impressed by just overall a lot of the things that were being presented to the ANF committee or to the board in a very seemed to be in a more comprehensive picture than I was aware in the own organization that I was in. So that was really what impressed me initially, I would say. And of course, over the next decade and a half, I got to learn a lot more of the intricacies and what's behind it. But it was still some of those first meetings were quite impressive, and I really enjoyed being there. Apart from meeting people from different other ecumenical bodies and communions. It was just a great experience in my first experiences on the board of Church World Service.
Yeah, and the fact that you just talked about, that you were confused in the beginning about National Council of Churches and Church World Service, of course. You're one of those people that already worked with Church World Service when they were still part of the organization was still part of the National Council of Churches. So you have seen and experienced the whole split, and then also later on the way Church World Service started to organize the board. So yeah, and if we talk about 75 years of Church World Service, you have been part of many of those years. It's pretty incredible. So besides the fact that you have been the treasurer for a long time, as well as involved with support of Church World Service's work, because you work for one of the member communions, right? Has there been other ways that you had been involved as well?
So I would say one of the interesting things for me is that as I worked with, part of the Board of Global Ministries that I work with is United Methodist Committee of Relief, Unrelief. It's a separate entity, but it's part of Global Ministries. But its work was in some ways similar to Church World Service. And so I really began to look creatively for places where we could work together and not have to overlap,
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, the whole work around migration that Church World Service has done, global migration, and initially refugee work, and then into migration, was something which, again, we slowly got out of, so that we would really do that work through Church World Service without having to sort of duplicate it, because Church World Service had a much better infrastructure and capacity and potential. And even till today, we're in the process of approving another significant grant from our board, hopefully later this month, to really work through Church World Service. I began to look for places where we can sort of work together without having to duplicate some efforts. That was one thing I really began to look at. But then, of course, apart from serving on the board, I was obviously a member of the executive committee and the ANF committee and the treasurer. I worked very closely with Joanne Rendell, of course, who I've known as a friend for many years now, who's in my opinion, an excellent CFO, and worked with her. And I was also involved in the search process for the recent search process to replace John McCullough, and so I was very involved in that. So it was just a long time, and there are probably other things that I'm not remembering now that I was probably engaged in because of my long tenure, and of course, sort of being in this transition from what was a representative board to a more what we would call a skills-based board, to use the words you said. That was not an easy transition too, and so I was really I thought it was a way of privilege to be on both of the boards for almost equal time, because I think I was about I don't remember the new board come in 2012, or was it after that? I can't remember.
I don't know the exact
Yeah,
date as
but
well.
it was a few years. It was at least I think 6 years or 7 years, and I was also about 6-7 years in the old board. So I was able to really sort of transition between these two different periods, and give me good insight into the differences between, or the benefits, and what we gained, what we may have lost a bit of, things like that. So that was a very interesting experience, and to have been the treasurer to all this time, which was has been not an easy role. I mean, the finances have always been something where we had to keep an eye on, in spite of Joanne's great work. So I think it was a great. It took a lot of engagement, and I was very engaged. I've served on a few other boards, but I think Church for
Mhm.
Service was which really captivated my attention and interest. And as you know well, over the years, I think I was fairly dedicated board member to the work and mission, and I'm today even in a different role, of course.
Yeah, and I mean, just a quick remark from my side. You know, when you talk about the representative board and skills-based board, it's in a way also not fair, because it almost sounds like that the previous board did not have skills, and
Sure.
that's definitely not the issue. But yeah, I mean, it's because we had some excellent an excellent board before we changed the direction as well. I mean, the fact that the board at that time thought, Church World Service needs another type of board, that alone
Mhm.
required a lot of work and a lot of strategic thinking and vision. So I think a lot of kudos to you and the rest of that particular board, because I know that was not easy. I would like, we were talking a little bit about 75 years. Church World Service at one moment was also celebrating its 50 years. And then this particular book was made. And it says Church World Service, 50 years of help and hope. So if you would be asked to make a book about 75 years of Church World Service, what keywords would you use in the title?
Well, I would use the word together, would be one word I would use, because I think,
Mm-hmm.
Church for Service's uniqueness is because of all the member communions that it brings together in its membership. And again, we can always talk about how engaged the different communions are or not. But
Mm-hmm.
besides that point, but I think it's a very unique thing that we have, 37 or whatever the number is today, I'm not sure, different communions that are involved. But I think the word I would use is together, because I think it does bring people across. And even as the board has evolved and now to a different board, we still come from very different backgrounds and bring a lot of different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really like to use the word together, and would be one word would be important. And hope, of course, is another word which is really relevant, always relevant, because I think if you look around what's really happening in the world, sometimes you almost don't want to have hope. But if you don't have hope, then it's not worth doing what we do if you don't have the hope that we can make that difference. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
together, hope or hopeful would be two words that come up for me,
Mm-hmm.
that I would say. I think that's you know um, another word I would also use is, maybe, I don't know the word is resilience or not is the right word, but I think
Mm-hmm.
the adaptability that Church World Services had over these 70 plus years to keep,
Mm-hmm.
or 75 years to keep adapting and shifting to what the reality and what the needs are. And
Mm-hmm.
not only has Church also had to adapt to the reality of the world around us, it had to adapt to the reality of its communion, its members, and
Mm-hmm.
and that changing scenario. So adapting on several different fronts. And so I think that, and each of the communions are experiencing their own shifts and own change at this moment in time. So just multiple levels to be able to adapt and adjust to what the needs are, and all the different complexities that go into each of the communions, and also managing the different, uh, the communions. We range from a whole lot of theological perspectives too, which are
Mm-hmm.
members. That's another whole piece. So a lot of adapting, maybe is a word, or flexibility or resilience,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the word is. Those are words which come up for me is churchual. And not, I mean, I think as much as we know that it's not been an easy journey, I think church world services continue to remain in the forefront of some of the key issues of our time. And that's been
Mm-hmm.
really important. I think it's still remained relevant. That's the most important thing, not just adapting to survive, but
Mm-hmm.
adapting to stay relevant. And I think that's definitely something that Church for Service has been able to do, I think.
Okay. I like that, together hope and adapting and staying relevant. When we talk about that, that journey, the way I often describe Church World Service is, it started as a U.S. ecumenical Christian organization that slowly over the years have, evolved into a global interfaith body. If you hear me say that and describe that, do you agree with me? And if so, why? And if you don't agree, can you also please explain, why you see it differently?
I guess the question will be what perspective are we looking at it from, right? So if I look at it from the governance point of view or the sort of the membership point of view, then I'm not sure that. So I would say I'm not, that would not be the description I would use. It'll be a little bit modified from that, because we are still in terms of our member communions are all church-related communions, if I'm not mistaken. So I would say that. However, um, I think the work that the Church World Service has done, the way it has operated on the practical level, the way I think it is definitely, it's probably even more than interfaith, I would say, perhaps. I don't think Church World Service has ever discriminated in how it has served, where it has reached, who it is looking at, the populations, the beneficiaries, the partners. I don't think it has discriminated on any form, whether it's faith, non-faith, Christian or non-Christian. So I think definitely being a global interfaith would be easily a very fair description of the agency, I would say. And I think if interfaith has any kind of perception of only faith, I think it's even beyond that, right? Because I think we don't look necessarily at whose faith is what and who
No.
we serve. So I think it's definitely transcended all those, all those kind of divisions or markers, so to speak, into some really being someone which has been very universal in how its outreach has been.
And is that a good thing that happened, according to you?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good thing. I think it's. I mean, because even no matter, any of us, whether we are in the church or not church, if we have working in the humanitarian sector, I don't know how we discriminate against anyone, how we create, and I think we have to be very, very aware of our calling, which has to really basically to alleviate suffering. That's what it is. And so no matter who is suffering, we should do that. The one question for me has always been the whole question about the governance question, and around not only the governance, not so much governance, more the membership question, the membership of the communions and Church World Service, and what does it really mean? And that's a continually evolving piece, because as we have known, the mainland denominations, United States, are all struggling with their own declining memberships. What does it mean for them? And consequently, what does it mean for Church World Service? The uniqueness of, in some ways, was being the humanitarian agency, which sort of represented so many or the majority of the Protestant communions in the United States. It was a very unique place that Church World Service had and probably and still has. But what the role of the communions themselves are in the changing scenario of the United States itself, obviously has shifted, and consequently it shifts, the impact on Church World Service. So I think that, but that's still a unique niche, which I hope that, so for me, it's important that even though we have our own humanitarian organization in the Methodist Church, we continue to work significantly with Church World Service. But I think it's important not to lose this whole ecumenical connection at that level, for what it is worth. Though I also think that, if it is not the end of the world, if that's not the way it is in the long run, but it's something unique that I think does matter, and it has a certain attractability to it in that sense.
What do you like to say, or what do you want to wish for Church World Service?
Well, I would want to wish that Church World Service will continue to be led and be effective and relevant to help alleviate suffering in this world, as it has been doing for 75 years. That will continue to be relevant
Mhm.
and led in that way so that it is relevant and continues to make the impact it has made in so many different unique ways in its 75-year history. And that's my wish for it. Uh, but and much as I would wish for it to be in existence for many more years,
Mhm.
that will, if it's relevant, it will exist for many more years.
Mhm.
And if it's not relevant, it will not. That's why I wish for it to continue to be relevant on the cutting edge of the major issues that are facing our time. And like I used the words earlier,
Mhm.
continue to be adaptable and flexible to what the needs are, uh, both of those who are those who are suffering. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, well, you also know that because you've been part of that discussion as trying to be focused on that staying relevant and how to connect with a younger audience as well, and that's still a kind of a struggle for us. Church World Services has gone through this branding discussion, and part of the branding, and it's not only, as you know, that's not only the discussion as part of the branding, but part of that discussion we have had, and we are having a discussion in terms of a name change, a possible name change. What is your opinion about that, if that would happen?
Yes, it's a very good question, and I was part of some of those conversations, as you
Mhm.
well know, and you and I have talked about it as well. And I, I think the I think it's important to be relevant. And to be relevant, the name Church World Service might not be the best thing at this necessarily to reach a wider audience.
Mhm.
Not might not, I think it will not. I mean, I think it's very clear. So, and so for me, the question is not so much what the new name is.
Mhm.
It is how do we make sure that we keep that connection for those that the old name matters. They know this is the new name,
Mhm.
right? And that the new name, because I think I realized, because I've been involved in a couple of other naming processes for
Mhm.
other organizations, a couple of other organizations, and one we did very swiftly, and I currently chair that board. And as I was thinking this through, it just struck me also that no matter what the name is, I mean, of course, you want to have a name which makes sense,
Mhm.
but no matter what the name is, it's what you do that will matter.
Mhm.
If what you're doing is really effective, then I think the name will get its own, will continue to be used. So I think as long as the name is not something which is totally out of this world, and maybe it needs to be out of this world to be remembered also, who knows? But I just think as long as the name is fairly okay. So obviously my thinking on that has evolved over time.
Mhm.
And I also do know, because again, I'm obviously, I'm not sure how I would categorize myself in an age group, but I've been around a long time. And so I'm in around a group of people whom Church World Service meant something.
Mhm.
CWS meant something, and it's a name which has got buy-in and cachet in many
Mhm.
of these places. But as we know also that group of people obviously are going to fade away over time. And what is the relevance for a new generation of younger people? And so it's whatever name that we go to, and I think it's probably makes sense to look at a new name, as long as we make sure that it's communicated well and it is, people
Mhm.
understand a little bit of that, and there is some sort of yeah, I think that as long as people understand that connection, I
Mhm.
think it's okay. But I do think that almost every organization who's trying to be relevant today is looking at new names
Mhm.
for whatever reasons. But I think yeah, and in some cases, so I think, because again, I think for the younger generations and newer generations, the name like Church World Service might be a little bit more, uh, maybe less attractive for
Mhm.
sure than something new. So I think considering a new name is not a bad thing. And again, that's as long as it's thought through, and then decisions are made. But if the work continues to be as effective, then the name
Mhm.
will follow the work. I
Mhm.
don't
Mhm.
think that would be a loss that if that's the case. You know what I mean?
Is there an anecdote or an experience, a memory which best or which well describes your time with CWS, something that you experienced? Can be a happy thing, can be a sad thing. It's
For me, I think if I'm looking at my own experiences, then my personal experience, I think I would be two I would lift up. I think, it was the meetings that we had at the Capitol, in the U.S. Capitol, a couple of times with different
yeah.
senators,
Mm-hmm.
the previous time and then one maybe last year, and just to be able to uh, uh, see the impact that Church World Service was able to have, like to bring senators and to meet with the board members and to speak. It was
Mm-hmm.
just it showed the reach of Church World Service for me, and that was
Mm-hmm.
it was a very positive thing that many of the senators or congressmen, whoever they were, did know about Church World Service. Some of them knew quite a bit about it and made some statements that show that they were not just. So that was one thing which I will remember pretty effectively. The other one also for me has been the ability to engage with so many different people at the boards meetings that I've been over the years, who were passionate about Church World Service.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, and Church World Service is a unique animal, if I might use that word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't belong to a denomination. It's not necessarily a true NGO. It just got this, and so you have to almost, you have to know it to like it, or like it to know it, or whatever you want to call it. And so the passion that I saw from many of the members who care
Mm-hmm.
deeply about the work, that would be the second thing I would say. And then the third thing I would say this, not because I'm talking to you, but just the staff. I always enjoyed working with the staff at Church World Service. It was just the professionalism, the spirit at which they came to work around was just great. And that's more than I miss that more than anything else, because I grew to know and like all of you, and but I guess it's beyond knowing and liking. It's just what the staff brought to the table
Mm-hmm.
was always something I really. So these are the three things that for me. I would say. I mean, you asked me for one, I gave you three or something things. I just,
Oh, that's
but
great.
but
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that because again,
Yeah.
I work on other boards, but I don't have the same comparisons on these three things that I shared with you. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. And I would like to. It's maybe in the same kind of area, but I would like to hear a name from you. If I'm asking you for a name of a colleague, a partner, or a supporter of CWS who best embodies from your point of view what CWS is about, who will you name and why?
Well, for me, probably, I guess, I mean, I could name a few people, but I'll probably say Joanne Rendell would be the person I would name. Again, of course, firstly, I worked with her so closely as
Mm-hmm.
CFO, and I mean the treasurer for so many years. But I mean, as you know, Joanne, well, I think the spirit with which she works, the passion, the intensity, the dedication, and the care that she brings to her work, and it's just a huge calling for her. So for me, that's why I would say. And it was not easy because there were times, of course, as you know, even getting the payroll done was a challenge and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But always the spirit in which she tried to approach things, I just thought was a true gift, and I have greatest respect for her. And so I could name others too, but if you want one person, and probably because I worked with her the longest and the closest, and we went through a lot of things over these years,
Mm-hmm.
she does embody the spirit of Church World Service in a true way. Really cares and loves the organization. I know that.
I think the whole world is looking at racial justice, and from the moment that Church World Service was established in 1946, racial injustice was already part of the world, unfortunately. And then it had maybe peaks in terms of attention. If you think about the role of CWS in fighting injustice and specifically racial injustice. Do you think the organization has done a good job, a so-so job? What are your kind of reflections on that? And I'm asking this because I think it's important for an organization to use these type of moments to look back and how can we improve our work further, both as an organization, but also in our programs and the way we deal with each other as colleagues and staff and partners.
I think that's no. I mean, obviously, it's a very relevant question for today. I think there are different ways that you could look at it. Maybe let's start with the level of governance, the board, the diversity of the board. How diverse we were. And I think that has always been a value for Churchwell Service. I always think there was a lot of diversity on the board. And when at times, since I've had such a long tenure, so I can say this at a couple of times when there were not, those imbalances were very quickly restored. So I think, so on a board level, I think there was always diversity of race, gender, ethnicity that was looked at. So I think it was a value that was very important to Churchwell Service. I think on the staffing as well, I think there were always, this work was happening for a long time. I mean, for, many years now. Even before DEI became a big thing, it was something which was already there with Churchwell Service. So I think that's something which was happening there. I guess the question then comes, in terms of outreach and work, where was Churchwell Service in this area? And I think the important question is, the whole issue of racial injustice is such a wide issue. And what is the niche that each one of us has to deal with? Because, obviously it's a broad issue, and the more people talk about it broadly, the less they are doing, because it's so broad, right? And so, because in many ways, I think some of the work that, the whole question of racial injustice obviously creates, the imbalances create more and more vulnerable communities. And I think by the work that Churchwell Service has been doing, we have been obviously reaching out to those communities which need the help, which also, so in some ways, it's not non-existent in terms of the outreach. Even the whole question of global migration and issues like that, of course, a lot of that is connected to race as well. But that I would say, so I wouldn't fault the organization and say, well, we have not done anything much in this area. The question is, what more can we do, right? Is there more that we can do to address these systemic issues? I mean, do we have the voice? Do we have the leverage, as I think at times we do as an organization, to speak out on these issues, advocate, or make an impact? So obviously, I think it is something that every organization has to look at critically and see what it is doing practically to address. Because talking about it, we can all talk about it. As you know, it's a thing that many people talk about today. But what are we actually doing around that? So to answer your question, whether Churchwell Service has done enough, I wouldn't say no, it hasn't done enough up to where we are, because I don't know what else could have been done. It was not necessarily a primary focus in some ways directly, but indirectly, I think the work does impact, a lot of communities of color in our work that we do. However, the changing scenario and opportunity that it provides, and because of Churchwell Service uniqueness, again, and where it sits, are there possibilities and initiatives that Churchwell Service can take up that can attract people from a wider spectrum because of where Churchwell Service sits, or CWS sits today, and to do something about this on a bigger scale? For example, I know there's this meeting which is happening next week, being called by Churchwell Service and NCC around the whole issue of, of global migration, and related to that, which also happened 4 years ago, I think in 2017 or something like that, in Indianapolis. So, I mean, is that a place that Churchwell Service is ready to go to in terms of, taking a more aggressive position around the issue of racial injustice in this country, and but I think it has to be done in partnership with a lot of others, because that will give it more impact, because on its own, there's only so much any of us can do. So, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think there could be a lot of traction for that, a lot of interest in that, to really try to help tackle these pieces, because we know that as much as people are talking about it, there are others talking against it and trying to work against it, as you know, to even as you know, I think you may have followed, like here in Georgia, they passed this new voting laws yesterday or this week, which is going to significantly restrict primarily people of color, African Americans, from voting, in the next election, because obviously they were concerned with the high turnout that mail balloting, the absentee balloting allowed. So it's just very unfortunate that there are continued steps to continue to push us backwards in this area. So we need to take steps forward, and perhaps Church World Service could, be a significant player in that fight, along with other partners who may be interested in doing that with them. So it's really worth some creative thinking if the organization so wants to. It could be quite effective, I would say, given the outreach that it does have. And I know we've specialized in certain sectors, but I think this work is important. It's really important at this time. It's a huge crisis that we're all facing.
Yeah, no, thanks for that insight, Roland. As an interviewer, I try to listen, but I will say my 2 cents here. I totally agree with you, and I think it can be that goes beyond the US, and of course,
Exactly.
because we are living in the US, we are focused very often on this country, and a lot needs to happen, but similar issues are happening in different ways. And I was yesterday on the webinar. In Indonesia, it's also there. It's about Jakarta against Eastern. People who are living in East Indonesia, who are darker skinned, and in India you have the caste system, right? Which is so there are a lot of injustices out there where we, because of our position, definitely can play a role, and therefore, what is important is to look back and are there certain situations in history where we could have done more, and that will help us then to be stronger in our actions, in the future. So actually, we are slowly at the end of our conversation. So thank you so much for your time and insight and sharing of your experiences. Are there any last words for
Yeah, I think probably it's thank you for this opportunity, Maurice. It's great to be able to reflect a bit. It's so often, life is so fast these days. I don't, so to reflect back on my time and tenure and brought back some memories. And it probably will be appropriate for me to end by just saying that I just want to congratulate John McCullough on his tenure as the CEO and president for a long time. I knew John before that, his work at the United Methodist Board of Global Ministries. We were colleagues at that time, and then John left and joined Church World Service, and it was again great to have worked with him for so many years on the board and as treasurer on the executive committee. And in a strange way, his time with the board ending and my time ending almost similarly. It's kind of an interesting coincidence. And so I just want to congratulate him, wish him the best in his retirement, and also applaud the work he did. I think he was a visionary, or is a visionary leader. And I think the good thing that he did was really bring good people around him. And that's what really enabled Church World Service to be as successful as it was, of course, with his vision, but also having the right people around to contribute and execute what was the vision for the agency. I just wanted to end probably by just saying thank you to John and wishing him all the best in his retirement, or whatever he does next. I don't believe he totally retire, but whatever he does next. So, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Roland. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
you see you? Do you see me? Will you be the eyes so that we all can be?
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you want to know more about Church World Service, please go to cwsglobal.org.